Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody at New York Jewelry Week, and especially JB and Bella for organizing this event. I am thrilled to be on, and I appreciate everyone's time. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. Okay. So I do want to let you know that I have my wonderful Sam Romanoff from my team with me today online. And so if there are any questions along the way, he'll be gathering those. And at the end of my little presentation here, we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. So looking forward to that. So please send in questions. I love questions. So basically, yes, I do want to talk about my latest work and then talk a little bit within sort of just how I work. I love coming on and hearing everybody's process and everybody's different mode of coming to this world of jewelry that we're all involved in. So I named this presentation Universal Storytelling in Jewels because the storytelling is so important to me. It's intrinsic to how I work and to my creative process. And just to have a few scribbles on a page. I'm entering just about my 35th year of jewelry designing, 35th, 36 maybe. And this is a picture of me in Florence. I basically find, pattern and storytelling in every detail. I feel so fortunate, even during this time when we are sort of isolated, somewhat more isolated and can't travel and are, in our spaces, just the fact that, thank goodness for books and online things. And, I can still find constant inspiration for what I do. And just to give a little bit of background on where I come from, because I kind of look back, people ask me how in the world I came to design jewelry, and I really completely fell into the world of jewelry. But when I look back at my Southern roots, and that's a picture of me down in the corner there with my mom and my grandmother, and the fact that I come from a very sort of strong family of women that were extremely independent sort of speaks a lot for the fact that I became an entrepreneur and that I maintain this sort of curiosity and love of exploration throughout my life. That was completely nurtured in me from a very, very, very young age. Oops, sorry. Let's get this going. So I grew up basically 0 to 14 in Virginia, but luckily born into a family of travelers. And I had the good fortune to travel with my family at a very young age. And then I ended up studying in Europe. So part of my formation is certainly in the South, and a certain classicism and a certain ritual that is being Southern, but then also I partially really grew up in Europe, and I spent basically all of my 20s in Florence, and I was there studying Italian Renaissance literature, particularly 14th century Italian, which is very relevant to this last year and what I've gone back into. So again, influenced by my family, my mom visiting me in Florence. I grew up in Florence in my 20s around people that used the artisans in their day-to-day life, whether it was for making a piece of jewelry for themselves, whether it was having a piece of clothing made or shoes made. And so I was introduced to this world of the artigiani in Florence. And my mom came to visit me on an errand, just to come visit me in Florence, and sent me on an errand to set an ancient coin for her. And so this was just this random thing, but here I'd been in Florence studying 14th century literature, living and breathing the art and architecture of Florence, and walking into these goldsmith studios in the center of the city near the Ponte Vecchio was like walking in through a time warp. I felt like I'd walked back into 14th century Italy. I became completely fascinated by gold work and the history of ancient coins in particular. I not only set a coin for my mom, but sort of a little entrepreneurial spirit was percolating, and I started buying other coins, having them set, venturing back to Charleston, South Carolina, where my family was living at the time, to my mother's horror, sort of selling things to her friends, figuring out a way to continue in this world. And at the same time, I started studying. I just finished my master's in Italian Renaissance literature, and I was sort of very much in my sort of academic head, and I started studying the history of gold. So I was looking at Etruscan gold, like this piece that you see on the left here, studying granulation. And with these goldsmiths in Florence, I started having them go back to ancient ways of working the gold, and started almost my early pieces, I refer to them as being archaeologically inspired, because I was really looking at granulation and working in high carat gold and pretending that these pieces were possibly pieces that you might find dug up somewhere in a box, you know, that someone had stored away, or, you know, they've gotten lost in these beautiful things that would come up. So that was sort of, I made this path of, you know, studying ancient jewelry to, and it was sort of my way really of learning the craft. Many people ask me today if I do bench work. I am not a bench jeweler. I am a creator. I bring creative ideas to the conversation. I realized very early on that these goldsmiths that I work with, many of them started apprenticing at 13, 14 years old. Their hands and their ability is far, just so tremendously skilled. So they have been incredible collaborators for me for all of these years. I'm showing some of my sketchbooks. These were early, this is sort of my travels too and my storytelling. Basically, I've always kept sketchbooks, so I keep notes in the form of sketches and notes along the way. Early on, you know, I was looking at the ancient, the architecture and the artwork around me, and this translated into some of the jewels that I do. And some of these pieces, like the piece on the left is I call the Arcadia ring. That's one of my archival pieces, but how I work, and I think everyone works so differently, and it's always sort of interesting to understand these like kernels of creativity and inspiration and what leads to the next thing. But basically, I look at it at this point in my life as, you know, I see my imagination and creativity as kind of a filter for things I love to study. So early on, again, it was studying ancient gold work, looking at granulation, looking at architectural detail. Even in this bracelet, on the top has sort of a grotesque pattern from all of the murals that you see in the Uffizi and some of the palazzi in Italy. And, you know, sort of is my, not taking exactly a replica of something, but putting it through the filter of my imagination to create something new. And the reason I'm taking you through this, because it gives you the sort of, in a nutshell, you know, I love having people into the studio here because, you know, I can show them little bits and pieces of my path and my journey, but this sort of brings you to the connection of where I get with the collection that I just did. And then so many of these pieces have become classic pieces for me. Those that are familiar with my work might recognize these rings. These have come to be called at this point by my team classic temple rings, but these were also very originally inspired from trips that I made during school, looking at the mosaics in Ravenna. The 6th century mosaics were all based on a composition of color, whereas where I was living in Florence, the Florentine Renaissance is based on line. So this idea of compositions of color, that's when I started getting into using colored gemstones. And again, to tribute, at this point I work with incredible cutters and gem dealers and mining families around the world. But at the time, again, I owe my beginnings to these goldsmiths in Florence that would introduce me to purveyors of colored gemstones. And, you know, I started using my first colored gems, but very much an early nod to these Byzantine mosaics. The rock crystal amulet. also came along the way in my early pieces. The rock crystal amulet has become probably my most signature jewel that I do. But the very first rock crystal amulet that I created was probably in the mid 80s, and a couple of things were very influential for me at the time. Again, storytelling for me is going back to history, going back to universal stories, early stories of humanity, and looking at jewelry as one of our first arts of really as human beings. If you think of you know, even just a child picking up a shell on the shore and, you know, tying it on a string around your neck, or, you know, early man picking up a stone that had a certain shape or something that he chiseled into a certain shape. This idea of charm or talisman and amulet has always been very important to me, and that symbolism in jewelry. And I think that the things that jewelry beyond almost so many, I wouldn't say beyond so many of our arts, but it's so much symbolic to each of us as an individual, and also how we fit into our own sort of cultural pods, if you will. And I have two books here that, you know, I was putting this together yesterday, and I was thinking of things that were so important to me along my path. And there was an exhibit at the Archaeological Museum in Florence in the early 80s, and it was a group of talisman and amulets and charms, intaglios, cameos, things that had been collected by the Medici family, and particularly by Lorenzo de' Medici. And the story has it that during the Renaissance, which of course was a very open-minded period, and there were lots of travelers traveling east to west to the Orient and back with treasures, and people would come through Florence. And the story has it that Lorenzo de' Medici would always have the curiosity of who was in town and what they had in their pockets. So, you know, in my imagination, you know, what were those amulets, charms, gems that came back and forth? So that was an incredibly romantic exhibit, and what it conjured up just in the imagination was very important to me. Also, this book, which I don't see come up very often, I've collected over the years. I love books. I've collected over the years many jewelry books. And this book, Les Bijoux by Eugène Fontenay, it's a fascinating book. He was a jeweler and basically anthropologist. And I see myself a little bit as a jewelry anthropologist, just for the symbolism in jewelry. And he is one that captures that idea of sort of show me a jewel and I'll show you a culture. So there you have it, my rock crystal amulets. They live on. There is always a new amulet. There's a new one that I'll show you coming up in the new collection. But in my processes, I work very thematically. I really do go down avenues of interest. To me, I play in sort of two large central themes of kind of the heavens and the earth, but I also go down paths of looking at, I might be interested in Tibetan paintings and Tibetan Buddhist paintings, or if I've traveled to a certain place in Morocco and there is a regional tribal jewelry that's fascinating to me, I might follow a path of a story about that. But those are how I work. And again, that great fortune in being a jewelry designer to be able to follow those paths. And it's come up as I've talked to people that I've said, you know, this line, literally, I am still learning to be a jewelry designer, because certainly I'm still learning about so many fascinating things about the metals we work with and the gemstones, but I'm definitely a storyteller. I love weaving a story, and I love weaving those stories into my work. And I love painting watercolors. This would be my little avatar. So as I say, there's sort of two central themes, there's two central worlds where I play. And one is based on looking at ancient astronomical drawings, astrology, the combination of science and myth and art. And years ago, my first celestial collection debuted with the Ptolemaeo, and that is this piece. It is a functional model of the Ptolemaic hypothesis, which was a hypothesis that said the Earth was the center of the universe. It is all in sapphire, except the bright green is green Tsavorite garnet. And it is exactly the scientific model as put forth by the astronomer Ptolemy some 2,000 years ago. So when I do a collection, basically every season I do a new collection, and I work in sort of different tracks. I do fine jewelry collection that is usually thematic, and then I do high jewelry work that's usually around very special gemstones, and I do haute couture pieces, which are almost where I really play in terms of, it almost becomes sculptural, and I pay less attention to even the wearability of the pieces. Sometimes they're more sculptural, larger pieces where they're three-dimensional, and to date they have mostly had to do with animals. This is a rock crystal amulet in celestial that has the phases of the moon on it. Zodiac charms. These were done after I went on a trip in France to the Burgundy country, to Vézelay. There's a very beautiful abbey there where the Crusades took off from. And one thing I love about astronomy and astrology is that years ago those were on very equal footing. And I love the imagery of the constellations. So, you know, I combine all of these in my sort of meanderings within celestial. Then the Ptolemaeo pendant, I have to include this with such a huge honor in basically that collection. The first delving into celestial started in 2007 with the centerpiece being the Ptolemaeo pendant. And in 2015, after a exhibit that I did during the Haute Couture Week in Paris, the Decorative Arts Museum in Paris at the Louvre asked for a piece to be part of their permanent collection. And so the Ptolemaeo became part of their permanent collection. And what I love about this too, it has my full name there, Temple St. Clair Car, Italy. And this is a wonderful nod and honor to my Italian collaborators, because really without their incredible expert engineering, things like this would not necessarily have happened. So that brings me, so the Ptolemaean particularly brings me to this fall and this year. So what a year. So last March, as things were locking down, I was reaching out to my art historian friend, Rocky Ruggiero. I've been on his program talking about the plague, and the plague occurred in Europe in the 1400s, and 14th century, mid 1300s, and it was brought along the Silk Road from east to west and landed first in Italy. And sounds familiar, right? Because I was in Italy in February, and it was just starting, this current pandemic was just starting to break out in northern Italy. And very similar parallel to this historic plague in the 14th century that basically killed off, I think, at least half of Europe. And many, many artists and many creatives died during that time, and many survived. Dante was writing his Divine Comedy a little bit earlier than the plague itself. But there's other artwork, and if you'll have time, there's so many things to talk about, and I can't do them all here, but if you have time to go to my website on Temple Talks, I talk about a particular fresco of good and bad government that also was done during this time. And some of these things are incredibly poignant in our current history. So in reconsidering the Divine Comedy in particular, it's in 3 books. Starts with the Inferno, hell, goes into purgatory, and then paradise. Dante is the protagonist. This is my, in a nutshell, telling you about the Divine Comedy. And the first line of the Divine Comedy, Dante writes, as he starts his trip into hell, says, you know, in the middle of my life, I found myself in a dark forest of which the road was blocked. Sound familiar? To me, what we've gone through has felt like this, you know, passage through this darkness. Then he travels through purgatory. He arrives in Paradiso. And what I'd forgotten, and I had to revisit in Paradiso, this is actually a copy of my textbook from back in the day when I was in Florence studying. The Paradiso is based on the Ptolemaic hypothesis. So it's based on the jewel you just saw. As the poem goes through the different stages of Paradiso, it goes through the different orbits of the planet from the Earth all the way out to Saturn and beyond. And when he goes beyond, and basically this is the structure on the right is, I believe, like a 19th century drawing I found of Dante's Hell, Purgatory, and Paradiso. And on the left is a little drawing I made to do some photographs of my next pieces for this collection, you know, for this fall. So basically the last, as he arrives at the very, very top of Paradiso, he is hit with this divine light of the constellations and the stars. And he remarks, says, he realizes, and this remark says, amor que move el sole e la tre stelle, that love moves the stars and the other, and moves the sun and the other stars. And this can be interpreted, you know, I mean, Dante can be studied. There are many scholars that study the Divine Comedy all their lives, and there's so many different interpretations, and it can be interpreted from a religious point of view or a pagan point of view. But basically, the message is there is this light beyond, and no matter how bad things get, the cosmos continues to turn, the universe goes forward, and love conquers all. So, of course, the new amulet, which I have one on today, the Astrid amulet incorporates this line from the last line of the Divine Comedy, and then it has little glyphs of the different planets. And so, and typically how I work, and for this, so this is yet another chapter of Celestial. And the little piece on the left is literally another little cosmic instrument called an armillary, which is basically a little model of the cosmos, which is also a ring. That's called the Astrid ring. So these are the pieces from this new collection. And I did this collection also in 3 chapters, you know, reflecting a little bit of Dante. Of course, it doesn't go as deep as Dante, but in 3 chapters, basically starting with Astrid, going through Stelle, which was a very colorful, sapphire-y group of pieces, to a pave diamond group of pieces that came out sort of the elections week, and very starry light, light pieces. And basically, you know, I think with why I call it universal storytelling within what I do, because it is these big universal stories, whether in literature or mythology, that continually bring me back to explore different thoughts, different concepts. Another part of this celestial, sort of another door that is opening for me within my celestial work, is cosmic instruments. So within this particular collection, if you look across the top and on the right-hand corner, these are pieces that actually live in the Science Museum, the Galileo Museum in Florence. And when we all can travel again, I highly recommend putting the Science Museum on your list, particularly if you love jewelry, as there are instruments there that are quite large, but they're jewel-like. They're like the armillary that you saw in the ring. There are armillary there that are probably 1 meter in diameter. And they are, you know, many of the early scientists, architects, artists were also trained in jewelry. So some of these things have a fine workmanship and artistry that it's beyond just what their purpose and function are. So in the left-hand corner there, with my design team, we were in contact with an astrophysicist in Bologna that helped us develop a sundial bracelet. And so that is this bracelet, and I'll show you in the next slide, also part of this current collection. On the inside, as you see the engravings, we have it engraved so that basically you can tell time not completely punctual, but within a couple of hours, when the, as I say, when the grid goes down or we really want to slow down, it will tell you the time in New York or Florence. So there is the sundial bracelet. And so it has a little hole to one side where you could put it flat on a table, catch the sun coming in and read it on those lines that you saw engraved on the inside. It also has constellations that have to do with navigation that were very important to marine navigation. So it really is a piece to help you continue your journey, so to speak. And lately this piece, so I've just launched this piece, and pieces like this, I consider them, the amulets sit in my fine jewelry collection. A piece like this sits more in my high jewelry collection because they're very limited edition pieces, and often I personalize these pieces. So lately, this piece, I'm doing it special order for certain clients that want to personalize it with their own constellations. For instance, I have one client now who she and her daughters are all Capricorn and her mother is Leo. So for all of those women, I am including constellations of Capricorn and Leo. And I love that jewelry too, is that personalization. And many of the collectors that have my things from over the years, it really is that very, very personal connection of how they choose the jewels. And then often on the, particularly in these high jewelry pieces, what we do to make them extremely individual. So as I say, I play in the heavens with celestial bodies and also with earthly creatures. So the way I work is I'm an extreme nature lover, not only of, being on the ground in the forest, observing animals, bird watching. I'm also a scuba diver and love all marine things. So this is influenced not only at the fine jewelry level, but at the high jewelry and haute couture level. So Tree of Life, as with Celestial, Tree of Life is another of my umbrella collections.
Please? Oh. Use a guidance card.
And one of my favorite goddesses or archetypes is the goddess Diana or Artemis, goddess of the hunt, protector of all creatures. So for this collection, as with every collection, there is a specific amulet. So my vine amulet, which is one of our probably most popular rock crystal amulets, the vine amulet was designed with Diana in mind. So that idea of both, I always love, I'm a woman business owner. So the idea of strong yet soft. So, I love that for this piece in particular. So again, how I work is basically, create these centerpieces and then they break out into other pieces. And the Tree of Life had to do with earth, air, and water. So the Tree of Life pendant being the central pendant with the Tree of Life figure, and then all the other figures from lions and serpents and dragonflies and dolphins all break out from that piece. Another of the rock crystal amulets from this piece, the bee. And then just more of showing my process. So, not being a bench jeweler, I use many other materials, whether in this case, I was working on a bee bracelet. So I was pulling down wisteria branches from the walls in Florence and making little clay bees and doing my drawings and doing all that I can do to convey to my goldsmiths what the end product needs to be. So this is example from Tree of Life, but at the haute couture level. This is part of from my Golden Menagerie collection. And here is really where also pulling together 30 some years of partnerships and collaborations with the Florentines, everything, all of the details are hand chiseled. And my oldest goldsmith, who's going on, he's mid-80s now, helped to translate those wisteria branches into these golden wisteria branches. So as I said, marine things. So again, when I'm working in Tree of Life, I sort of go back and forth between marine and other earthly creatures. The marine creatures in particular often have to do with direct memories of experiences of mine. Here I am underwater in the Maldives in the Indian Ocean years ago. And, you know, I had held this image of flying fishes in my head for years. And I go on to sort of tangents of things I love, and whether in literature or in memory or experiences with my children. And that's how these things come to be. The frog prints, also from the Golden Menagerie. These were all of these very singular pieces, mostly born of either personal memories or experiences with my children. And that idea, I think for all of my storytelling and inspiration, creativity, so much of it comes from keeping very open to, again, that storytelling, to the mythology, to seeing details out in the world, whether in the natural world or it could be, you know, graffiti on a wall in New York City. The Medusa moon jellyfish, another marine creature. Again, these in the haute couture area were all very singular gemstones. Some people ask me, you know, do I start with a gemstone or start with the concept? In this case, it was a combination of both. This Andamuka opal was presented to me, and then the idea of the rock crystal over top, creating what's a natural creature, but almost seems like a mythical creature, creating with these materials. Same with Fantastic Mr. Fox. He came from experiences of observing foxes up in the Berkshires, leaping around, hunting in the snow. On the left is the chiseler in Florence, which I have really not seen anywhere else in the world, but this is probably, I think, from my experience, one of the only hand chiselers that I know of. And to do that, they literally plant the piece of the jewelry that needs to be chiseled into sort of a tar-based substance, and then he has all of handmade instruments to make every little piece of fur, as you see it on the fox, come to life. And I just love to make things. So they try to rein me in here as I'm running a business, because I'm supposed to be just focusing on jewelry, but I love making different things. So in Florence at this point, I often make boxes. This is a marble inlaid box I made for the bead bracelet. I do things in leather goods. I collaborate with other artists doing other incredible packaging for the haute couture pieces. And it's just, a part of I guess, a life and business of creativity. Now, where I am now, I wanted to share a little process of what in the world goes on next. And I've still been working in creatures. I'm still sort of toggling back and forth between the celestial world and the world of creatures and gemstones. So I've been in sort of a little bit of I call it my psychedelic phase. I've been combining very diverse gemstones from, you see here, Paraiba to ruby to mandarin garnet, Tsavorite, tourmaline, sapphire, blue, of course my signature blue moonstone, working on some different creatures and playing with pattern. Here you see, as part of that, these are sort of somewhat recently completed projects. This on the left is a serpent done completely in Australian Lightning Ridge black opal and fire opal. Black opals took us about 3 years to collect and cut them all. He did end up with an opal head here. He's not completely set, completely articulated serpent. And actually I'm working on another serpent now. These pieces take months and months to, as you can imagine. And then just how I work with some of my collectors, that opal on the right is an opal that landed with us. And in this particular one, I have certain collectors that I think of that love magical things. And this one was almost how I thought of it. It's just a little view into how I think of things. I see this opal and it looks like when you're, I don't know if you've ever been in a field in a meadow and you find a butterfly wing, and that's what this seemed like to me. So it immediately needed to translate into that. And then, as I say, on the upper right-hand corner, this combination of opal, demantoid, garnet, and paraiba. These are stones I've worked with over the years, but then every now and then something gets presented to you in a different way, and it kicks off a whole other line of imagery in my head. So as you see below, I've been working on octopuses. It's another creature that I love, and I've been reading and studying about over the last few years. And if you've not seen My Octopus Teacher, the documentary, you must. I've seen that a couple of times recently. It's very beautiful and such a magical creature that has completely captivated me. So I'm doing a project looking at the different complexions of an octopus. This particular one sort of playing around with Paraiba Tourmaline and demantoid and Tsavorite. Also, this put a little celestial back in here now, because I'm also at the same time, and it's just, I think this is just a very, I'm opening up my sketchbooks to you and sort of tell you where I am. I'm also working in celestial concepts right now. So I'm delving back into looking at some more astronomical instruments and very special pieces, some more high jewelry pieces within this world, and some planetary pieces that I will not go into detail about because those are going to be a surprise coming for next fall, but working on those right now. So that all brings me to another very important part of the business, and another thing that we're doing right now is how, you know, none of us works in isolation. I certainly work in, you know, a world where I delve back into many different cultural interests of mine, and then, you know, and then bring that into the jewelry, and then reach back out in terms of our philanthropic pursuits. My husband, who's worked with me in the business for 20 some years now, was a modern dancer. So we've been very involved in New York City in the arts, in particular dance and choreography, and supporting the arts. But then my great love, as you can imagine, is in conservation, and particularly community conservation. So between working on certain things in New York, supporting our food bank and the East Village where we live, to supporting artists that can't do as much performance as they would be able to right now, and conservation, this is all sort of a back and forth in terms of what we do. And in fact, this month, I just put these pieces in as sort of reminders of some of the creatures that we are really focusing on and caring about right now. We're doing a push for the month of November, giving back 20% of all of our sales online to an organization called Big Life, which is a conservation group in East Africa, in Kenya, that really supports both the Maasai community there and really works to protect wildlife and habitat. And these are hugely important to me. And I can only say that I feel so fortunate at this point in my career and life's work to be able to continue down the path of storytelling and creativity and being inspired, and at the same time being able to give back and tie it all together. So I will close there and welcome any questions, but I must express my appreciation for everyone tuning in, and hope everyone is being safe and well during this period. And I look forward to presenting more work and, you know, beautiful jewels to you.
Thank you so much, Temple. That was wonderful. So we have a couple of questions to end our hour. To start, where does the rock crystal in your amulets come from? That's from Karen. She's wondering where the rock crystal come from, and do you use it in any other pieces besides the amulets?
Okay. So rock crystal itself, natural rock crystal occurs in many places all over the world, but ours is mostly from South America. And then we have it cut and polished generally in Germany, typically. And our rock crystal, you know, I had to, because I'm talking about it occurs in many, many places, but to have the natural rock crystal in very clear quality that we use is very difficult. Of all our gemstones, we have a very high rejection rate in what we do. So anyway, it's very, very fine material. I do use it just like you saw in the Medusa moon jellyfish. Occasionally I'll use it over top of something. I'll have it cut like a lens. So in the Medusa moon jellyfish, I used it. Occasionally on a locket, I will use it. But I think it's a wonderful material. I mean, I love color, but I love kind of the magic of how rock crystal holds light. And it's that idea of the amulet being very particular and individual to the wearer. It's very interesting to me how it picks up the colors within, you know, somebody's own coloration or how they dress. And that's why I love it and use it so much.
That's great. It's a beautiful stone. So you talked a little about a past haute couture collection, and Chris was wondering if you have any plans of doing another one in the future. We got to see some new high jewelry pieces, but do you have any plans for doing another one of those collections? And if so, do you have any inspiration going into it?
I do. I can't totally share that at this time, but I do have a project that I'm working on. And these projects, the Golden Menagerie, all in all, took about 7 years. And Aseline published a book called The Golden Menagerie on the collection that took about 2 years. So these things, this is, let's say, slow jewelry. I do have a project that I want to do that's very important to me. So I'm working on that. And in the meantime, as I say, I have kind of these mini haute couture projects, or around the octopus is a really fun, like mini capsule of an haute couture piece.
Great. All right, next one. What is your favorite stone that you work with?
Oh my gosh, that's like asking me which of my sons is my favorite child. No, you know, I tend towards the blues and greens. However, that's not necessarily, I don't really have a favorite. I love brilliant, beautiful gems. So, and I love combining them. So I do love, you know, the interesting demantoid, Paraiba, those very exquisite stones, bright green, Tsavorite. But then I love the garnets. I love the full array of the garnet family. I like unusual gemstones. Of course, I use a lot of sapphire as well, but of course, I love lightning rich black opal. So I'm across the gamut. I love interesting, special gems.
So obviously from your presentation, it's clear that travel is a really big part of who you are and even your process of creating jewelry. Where, after the pandemic hopefully ends, would you want to go first?
I'll be right back in Florence, you know? I mean, Florence relationship is very important to me. You know, there are quite a few people in my company that have been here as long as 20 years. And my goldsmiths I've been working with since I basically have grown. They're like my brothers and uncles, and, you know, I've been working with them since my mid-20s. And so that's, you know, 30 some years now. And so that's where I'm going to go. You know, that's where my heart is, and my other sort of my alter ego. That there's Italian, my doppelganger, my Italian doppelganger, which is, you know, I speak Italian fluently and have deep emotional roots there. So I'll head there first, and then there's so many places I want to go. So.
Brandy wants to know, how did you choose to work with this particular charity, Big Life Foundation?
Again, you know, it's relationship. And I'm also, most of the charities that I've been involved with, authenticity is very important to me, and to really know who's working on something or what's really going on. So and a lot of these initiatives are ongoing. So a few years ago, I got involved with a women's organization in New York called Wings World Quest, which is an incredible organization that gives grants to women scientists and explorers. And I met the women that had started Lion Guardians in Kenya that do lion conservation. And I'm still involved with them. And then they often collaborate with Big Life. And I met board members from Big Life actually in Italy. And so wanted to expand, I kind of wanted to expand whatever help that I can do across species. And Big Life has some of the largest tuskers, big elephants in their area, and they've had incredible success protecting them. And, you know, I wanted to expand, you know, more across these other habitat next to Lion Guardians as well. Community conservation, I think what I learned actually during my research for the Golden Menagerie, for the last part of the Golden Menagerie, was called The Big Game, and it's about extinction. And I learned how community conservation, how important that is, and how important it is to support, like in this case, the Maasai community, and you know, bring this conservation along. So long story, but there are these tendrils of relationship and connection to how I got involved.
That's great. So there was a couple of comments on the sundial bracelet, and obviously I know that you make a lot, or you have a lot of interest in making cuffs. You made some beautiful ones over the years. Can you talk a little bit about your interest in particularly those cuffs, and then a little bit about the inspiration specifically behind the sundial bracelet?
Okay, so well, cuffs in itself, like there was an earlier one that I said was from a grotesque, basically playing on the idea of these grotesque, these certain grotesque meaning coming from the word grotto. They sort of, in the Renaissance, these mythological stories came back to play, to be very central and of interest to the Renaissance artists and writers. So sometimes it's the storytelling that I like to put onto a bracelet. So I did that one of the grotesque. I did one after travels in the western part of China to some Buddhist caves, and there was a Buddhist one. So those bracelets, often I use them to tell a story of something that I've become very interested in. There was another one that I did, a deer cuff bracelet that had to do with a sort of a Buddhist garden that's near Varanasi in India. And it's not, again, nothing is literal, but it's sort of taken from the storytelling and sort of my retelling of that story. So that's what some of those cuffs in gold are. When it comes to the sundial bracelet, again, this is this area that I'm going further into. That was the beginning of looking at these astronomical instruments that I say are somewhat jewel-like in the way they work, and there's a simplicity in how they function. So that particular bracelet is kind of the tip of the iceberg for me in terms of checking out these other instruments and sort of playing with how those can be reinterpreted in a jewel.
That's great. So I think the last one is, we got to see a little bit of the psychedelic animals that you created and some new ones that you're working on. Are there any other that you have in the future that you would like to make, and animals that you would like to, you know, create in jewels?
I think that, you know, I think the animals, I mean, the serpent begs to be explored further, because at this point, I've done a green snake, and then I've done that very exotic opal snake. And because we worked out in Florence the articulation of those snakes, and I think those creatures are so fascinating. So this is where the scientist in me, you know, because I want to look at sort of different species of creatures and explore what those can be in a jewel. And the same goes for the octopus. So those are where, again, these things take a very long time. I love doing stone layouts of color, and it's like, you know, I paint with watercolors, I do the drawings, and I play with the gemstones and lay these things out. It takes hours and hours and days to get there. So It's not like I'm doing many at one time, you know, so those are, I'm concentrating on those two areas right now, serpents and octopuses.
Wonderful.
Is that it for questions for now, Sam?
That is it for questions.
Okay. Again, I cannot express more my appreciation for being included in New York Jewelry Week.